Welcome to another exciting episode of the Aleph Zero Podcast. Today we'll be exploring the dynamic world of Web3 adoption in Latin America. Joining us will be Torres, a long-time advisor to Aleph Zero, and Christian Narvaez, the founder of Rayo Capital, which accelerates, funds, and supports founders in Web3. Let's dive in. Hey guys, great to have you here. If you could give us just a short intros, that would be great. And we can start with you, Max, since I know you for quite a long time.
Sure. So I actually grew up in Menlo Park, California. For the first 8 years professionally, I worked at several tech companies, just doing FP&A for them. After a while, I decided that I wanted to figure out what I was passionate about. So I decided to quit my job. I sold everything I had. I packed the bag, and then I bought a one-way flight to Europe, actually. Started traveling the world. The plan was just to travel for 1 year, try to figure stuff out. I ended up traveling through Europe, went to Morocco, did a little bit of Turkey, and then I ended up in Lebanon. And so in Lebanon, I quickly came to realize that things politically and economically were pretty bad. I experienced firsthand how banks were actually limiting the amount of money that people could pull out of their own accounts. And later on, those same accounts were actually completely frozen. And so imagine having your life savings just stuck in this bank account and you being told all these different things. So that was one thing. On the other hand, I remember just all these like crazy type of taxes that were being done on people. And a lot of that stuff didn't make sense. So what I wanted to do is, to work on a technology that could really, really change people's lives. And I came across the whole entire concept of DAOs, a decentralized autonomous organization, where you could fundamentally run an org by people voting on it. And so, but the issue with Ethereum at the time was just the fees were really hefty. And so I decided that I wanted to find a project that was working on something similar to Ethereum, but just a lot faster. I left Lebanon and started exploring Europe again to find folks that were in crypto. And I ended up in Poland and met the Aleph Zero folks. And so shortly thereafter, I joined as a finance director. And I was very fortunate to be able to meet folks within Switzerland and such. Fast forward a little bit, I then went on to ZeroX. At ZeroX, I was there for about 2 years, working on Series A and Series B. Those were some of the key highlights. And then after that, I became an angel investor as well as an advisor to multiple startups that were focused on building out infrastructure, more infrastructure in the blockchain space. And so as of more recently, I am very interested to see use cases, and that's where my interest in Latin America came from. I'm also Mexican by descent. So one thing that resonates very deeply is the whole idea of remittances, how my mom and my dad would always send money to the family. So right now, at this point, definitely interested in the area of use cases, and that's something that I've been exploring deeply within LATAM.
Yeah, and traveling, as you just said. All right, and Christian, what brought you to Web3 and blockchain in general?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me on today. Appreciate the invitation. And then how did it all get started? Wow. Well, first and foremost, I was born and raised here in New York City. I spent 10 years on Wall Street as a former energy investment banker, covering both the United States and LATAM clients. And it was back in 2017 when sort of my group of circle of friends, they were traders, bankers, hedge fund analysts, private equity associates. And everyone just started talking about buying Bitcoin and buying Ethereum and how it was pumping. So that's how I got started. I actually bought the local top in 2017. Obviously, back then, it was something that I wasn't too fond on speaking of. But looking back at it, it's the tax that I paid, I guess, to learn the right way to learn about the tech and the wrong way to learn about it. And obviously speculating on it and buying because FOMO is not one of them. So that's how I started. But then again, after being 10 years on Wall Street in 2020, I decided to just move on to other areas. And I wanted to travel the world for a whole year, just like Max. And in February of 2020, I left. But then obviously the pandemic hit. And for me, the pandemic was actually a blessing in disguise because I was able to have a lot of free time and study and do a lot of research on things that, interested me. So I started looking into fintech. I started looking into venture capital and organically came across Web3 blockchain, specifically the Ethereum ecosystem, and studied the technology, the infrastructure, and its many use cases. And one of the first ones that came to sort of that clicked for me, which was easy, was the remittance space. My mom immigrated from Ecuador back in the 80s to New York and sort of grew up sending money back to Latin America. So it's something that it's normal to us, right? Sending money back and forth and seeing how this technology could, make this use case, more efficient, more cost effective, to me was a big eye opener. And that was the first time, or that's how I started going down the rabbit hole. And that's when it clicked. And I've been in Web3 ever since. I joined a couple of angel syndicates and started investing and covering the fintech and Web3 space. And then in 2022, joined OP Crypto, which is a venture capital firm investing in early stage Web3 companies. They bridge the gap between US and LATAM. David is a former Huobi executive who launched OP Crypto back in 2021. And it was there where I was able to double down on and learn more about the DeFi space. I covered both US and Latin America regions. And at OP Crypto, I was part of their fund of funds team and helped them raise their fund of funds vehicle. We deployed across 4 funds. So it was definitely a great experience. And then after OP Crypto earlier this year in February of 2023, I went off on my own and launched Rayo Capital. And there, our goal is to accelerate fund and support founders globally in Web3 with an emphasis in Latin America. Latin America being the region that I've been covering for now almost 14, 15 years as a working professional. Right?
Yeah, and you, Max, last time I checked, you were in Puerto Rico, right?
Yeah, so ever since I started the World Travels back in 2018, I've been a little bit of everywhere. But over the last few years, I've been in Mexico, Colombia, and now I'm based out of Puerto Rico.
Yeah, so you guys have quite a good, I imagine, understanding of the market and, the insights from the really inside the country. So how would you say is the current awareness and understanding of, Web3, those concepts in Latin America?
So the awareness in Latin America at this point is pretty good. Just to give a bit of stats, based on the 2022 New Payments Index for MasterCard, about 51% of consumers have done at least one crypto-related activity in the past year. 77% of Latin American and Caribbean consumers agree they would use cryptocurrency more if they understood it better. And 82% would like to have cryptocurrency-related futures available from their financial institution. So what this is saying is that there is definitely a lot of awareness in Latin American countries. However, with recent news, there is the negative connotation that has come from recent scams such as FTX and NFT rug pulls. So what I would say is within Latin America, there is a thing where if you say certain trigger words, folks will remember those things, such as the scams and the NFT rug pulls. However, due to actual need, such as high inflation within a few of these Latin American countries, there is a strong desire to look at alternatives to have more financial inclusion. And I think Christian actually works very closely with a lot of different projects out there. So I'd be happy to hear a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. Chris, tell us, how's the progress going from the tech standpoint, from the teams building in those regions?
Yeah, I guess from a historical point of view, the early adopters of cryptocurrencies in general were, easy countries would be Venezuela and Argentina. Obviously, they've had a lot of political instability, currency fluctuation, and for them, seeking an alternative as a store of value was that, right? Cryptocurrencies. So they've been early adopters. Beyond that, I would say the 4 countries that have had a tech sort of boom or adoption have been Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, and Brazil. And organically, because of that sort of tech boom, that tech is getting implemented and startups are being built across those 4 countries. I would say are the four major countries of most activity, but organically we're seeing a lot of activity in Central America, in Peru, in Ecuador, in Chile, in Uruguay. But I would say the four countries of high activity and concentration would be Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, and Brazil.
And what are some, the most standing out use cases there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of everything that has to do with payments. A lot of companies have popped up, whether it's, on-ramp, off-ramps, the remittances space, sort of lending on chain. Due to the fact that there's a large informal economy, we're seeing products and solutions being built, bringing that informal economy onto technology platforms. And blockchain is definitely one of those. So I would say anything within the value of exchange, we're seeing solutions and companies being built around that.
Regarding crypto, you Max actually touched this subject that even post those NFT scams and FTX, the sentiment is probably still in Latin American population still positive towards crypto. But what's the from your perspective living there, especially in many countries as I know. What's your perspective on the general sentiment from the people living there? How they embrace digital assets? Are they doing that in their everyday lives already, or it's still kind of speculative novelty?
Sure. I think it's really country by country. For example, in Mexico, there is a lot of caution as it relates to just anything related to cryptocurrencies. If you actually say the word, then it does trigger some of those things that have happened in terms of scams. FTX is just one example. Also, NFT seems to resonate very poorly with folks. However, if you're talking about countries that have huge inflation, the whole idea of utilizing an alternative financial system is of necessity. So there's those cases in those countries where you'll continue seeing folks trying to figure out different ways to have a hold within an alternative financial system.
Yeah, I think it's the same, all over the world, not only in LATAM, right? I think Turkey is a good example, right? The inflation is really big there, and somehow it correlates with the number of people that are actively using crypto. So probably it is the ultimate solution, and of course we believe so. But right, so also I've seen that in one of the recent Forbes articles you mentioned, Christian, that the importance of blockchain solutions is really for remittance, and this you could actually expand on what Max started as a topic. So from your perspective as an investor in those startups, what's the general climate around blockchain-led remittance?
Yeah, I think so from the perspective of someone who lives in America and sort of sends money back to their families in South America or any other country, there's little alternatives beyond, maybe Western Union and other fintechs that have come up over the years. And obviously, because of the fact that they use archaic financial systems, the price point of sending money is still high, right? A quick example that I like to give is that sending $100, for example, to Ecuador, the fees on that is probably around $5, right? That might not seem material for someone like us. That's probably a cup of coffee, right? But $5 is half day's work in Ecuador, right? So you're paying fees that basically can, feed someone's family. And because of the fact that the only rails that we can and have been using are the only alternatives that we have, I think that needs to be revamped. So obviously the use case for remittances is definitely one that's material, because the high volume of capital that gets sent abroad, not only just to Latin America, but globally, is high. So if we could bring that cost down, those dollars and cents can go a long way in Latin America.
Are there already some major startups doing so? And are they used?
There's a company called Felix Pagos. They do a really good job at leveraging a communication channel that is very popular in Latin America, which is WhatsApp. So they've done a really great solution where you can transfer money via WhatsApp, and it's something that it's very, very familiar. Everyone in Latin America leverages WhatsApp. So again, something as easy as leveraging a communication channel like WhatsApp, I think is really important and brings easier, lighter solutions to be implemented without having to talk about the technology, blockchain, crypto. Felix Bowers is doing a really good job at putting the tech under the hood and leveraging existing channels, habits, and technology to facilitate money transfer.
So if I understood correctly, it's blockchain based, but people don't necessarily care it's blockchain based. And I believe this is like, if it's the way it works, it's probably the end goal for crypto, right? Just so you shouldn't care about the tech. It should just work and, provide security.
Correct.
And how about, the sentiment across the regulatory bodies? Web3 and crypto, of course, it differs around the world. We know how it's in the States, at least for now. So does Rayo Capital assist builders with facing the legal framework, or what's your take on actually the compliance / regulatory phase of doing blockchain-based business in Latin America?
So to answer your question, Rayo Capital, we do have partnerships with global law firms where we've been able to provide mentorship and guidance to our portfolio companies. And actually, it's alleviated and saved money from doing unnecessary legal work. So really happy about that. And then in regards to the sentiment or the regulatory environment in Latin America, there's, countries like Brazil and Mexico have sandboxes where it allows entrepreneurs to build companies without having to worry, being shut down, being sued, or, just having a target on your back for creating value. In general, I think because of the nascent nature of the space in Latin America, there's still not a lot of, harsh frameworks in place. And again, those sandboxes that already exist are allowing for innovation to flourish, are allowing for LATAM to definitely be a leader, and a lot of more companies are being created because, they're not, unfortunately here in the United States, because of the lack of clarity, there's a lot of companies that, are just afraid to build because you don't want to have a target on your back. You don't want to be shut down, etc.
Okay. So what do you think, drives the adoption in that region? Of course, we touched upon the, sending money, but if the regulations are not a problem, so is it just a matter of, building block by block and then, the environment is really supporting Web3? Or would you say it's somewhat different? Or do you see some clear, roadblocks before Web3 can really take off in Latin America? That's both to you, Christian and Max.
Yeah, I think to take a step back, in general, technology or entrepreneurship has been evolving and booming in Latin America. And a good example that I like to use is the same effect that the PayPal mafia had to the United States, to Silicon Valley, where it minted a lot of millionaires, and those millionaires went on to start their own companies. That same thing is happening in LATAM. There's a couple of unicorns that have popped up over this past decade, again, across Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, and had the similar impact and effect that PayPal had to the US, to Silicon Valley. And now we're seeing entrepreneurship flourish. A lot of companies from Latin America have gone on to Silicon Valley, raise capital, build companies. So now that is becoming a little bit more normal. And I think in general, entrepreneurship is something that is flourishing in Latin America, whereas before we were more, I would say, users rather than builders. Whereas today, beyond just users, more builders are popping up. Beyond that, there's a lot of technical talent across Brazil and Argentina. And that's obviously due to the fact that most of these companies are software companies or tech-enabled companies. Having that talent at home is definitely helpful. And I think that's one of the just main reasons we're seeing adoption, companies flourish, and unicorns popping up in Latin America.
And what would you say to that, Max? Would you agree, or would you have anything to add?
I agree with what Christian has mentioned. I just want to add that within certain countries, just speaking of Mexico specifically, there is still the case where if you really want a big change, you have to know certain people. And so because of this, I just want to say that connections does matter in some of these countries in Latin America. And as you have more and more successful unicorns, though, and as you have more entrepreneurs in the mix that have access to capital in the US, then that bridging of that gap is going to become very important going forward.
This is actually what I wanted to ask. So, part of the drivers might be the capital inflows from states or Silicon Valley. So you'd say that on one person level or one company level, it's basically what you are, Christian, doing, right? You're also, as a New Yorker, investing in Latin American startups. So is it a thing? Is it a trend that, also people from the United States notice the potential there and, they keep coming south?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, sort of the new generation of money managers or just in general management across corporates, they're younger, they're more global, they're more traveled. And I think that helps the region as a whole. And then, I mean, an individual sort of example would be me, right? I worked in investment banking for a decade. I cover Latin America as a region. My family comes from Latin America. And for me, it was sort of a natural progression. Now that I'm independent, building out Rayo Capital to sort of bridge that gap between the United States and LATAM. Here in the US, we have a lot of resources. Here in the US, there's leadership and there's obviously a lot of capital. And unfortunately, because of maybe not knowing or understanding how to do business in a different region or part of the world, business or just capital doesn't flow, right? And I think that is definitely changing. And we're seeing more entrepreneurship and private capital flowing to the region. And obviously with that, we have entrepreneurship ecosystems flourishing. And with that, obviously this new frontier tech like Web3 is getting adopted.
Are there any specific industries that are really on top of, Web3 adoption? I mean, beyond Web3. So I don't know, some supply chain or something around that. All the traditional companies, are they also embracing blockchain there, maybe more than in the rest of the world?
The many use cases that I've seen besides what we just spoke about have been also trying to fractionalize real estate, fractionalize agriculture or farmland. We're seeing a lot of platforms being built for renewable energy or carbon offsets. So I would say that those are the ones that we're seeing a lot. Obviously, a lot of gaming or gamified versions of what I just said have come up, but I would say those would be the major ones that I see often.
Yeah, and so real-world assets and tokenizing them still seems to be quite interesting and important for, the whole blockchain space, but also it makes sense in this specific region. And I know you also have a startup, Max, you invested in. Can you tell us more about it? Because I also know that it's focused on Latin America.
Sure. More recently, I've been deeply involved with what is called dBloks. So dBloks is a ticketing platform with Web3 in the background. So kind of the idea behind it is that we want to create a UI UX that is very similar to what folks are used to. Take, for example, Eventbrite and such. And so what we're doing there is we're utilizing blockchain to be able to fight against what are counterfeit tickets. And at the same time, to give all event stakeholders access to the secondary markets, thus creating a new economic opportunity for whoever is an event stakeholder.
And I know you're building this on Polygon right now, but you also have plans to, try to build it on, also other networks such as Aleph Zero, right?
Sure. So right now we are building this on Polygon, and just talk a little bit about adoption. One area that I have been seeing over these last few years of working for many different infrastructure projects is that, when you go in, you connect the wallet and you do this whole entire process of doing these really Web3 native things, most folks are not going to do that. Or at least the idea is that it's not that user-friendly to go in and connect all these things. So right now we're building on Polygon because there's a lot of UI UX tools that are already built out within that ecosystem.
Cool. That sounds also really awesome. And I had this thought that some blockchains got really popular in specific regions. And as the base layer is there, Is there something that originated from the space there, and you seem to be at least aware of it? Or I think you were building on Polygon, and you have the idea to also build it on Aleph Zero. But is there any other platform that seems to be popular there, or just the standard ones?
Sure. So are you asking whether, from an infrastructure standpoint, how have different blockchains been adopted?
Basically like that. But for example, there's this case of those more like European-based blockchains, like, I don't know, IOTA or Lisk back in the day. And they were really popular, for example, in Germany, because this is where they came from. So I know if there's a similar thing there.
So I think in terms of adoption of base layers, it really just depends on the use case. For example, within the financial industry, perhaps need faster transactions. So something like Aleph Zero would make sense in this case. Also for remittances, you definitely want that to be as low cost as possible. As you move into something like the supply chain management area, once again, perhaps transactions are something to consider. So one would need to look at that aspect. But beyond transaction speeds, I do think that the usability of these blockchains is very important. So take, for example, Ethereum. There's a lot of great UI UX tools that exist, and also a lot of help for developers that want to build on top of it. And so chains such as Polygon that have a lot of resemblance to Ethereum would be ideal from a usability standpoint. As you move on to newer chains, it will definitely be interesting as you see more UI UX features be built out for these newer chains in terms of that being able to be adopted within some of these use cases that we're talking about.
Yeah, it makes sense. I also have one for you, Christian. You are working a lot with founders, and probably a lot of first-time founders. So what's the usual, challenges they are facing? What support do you provide them, or what support is needed? For example, is it the access to talent? Of course, you mentioned that there's great talent in Brazil and Argentina, but I don't know how big the pool is there, or with the access to capital. So if you could expand on that, like what's the environment specifically for builders there?
Yeah, of course. So for us, we have 4 pillars that we focus on, which are, legal structuring, tokenomics, go-to-market, and fundraising resources. In Latin America, there's great entrepreneurs. I would say they do a lot with a little and are just great builders. The thing that they just lack is, accessibility to, networks of capital, I would say would be a good one. Access to, top tier advisory sort of shops, due to the fact that region hasn't been covered by the big players in Web3. Bridging that gap and providing those resources and those connections is definitely a key component. And, so very privileged and sort of lucky to have that network. I was, before launching Rayo Capital, I was over at OP Crypto, where I was able to grow my network of early stage Web3 investors globally. Beyond that, engage with exchanges across the world, engage with market makers, engage with the ecosystem. And now that I've been able to sort of build those relationships with Rayo Capital, I want to bridge that gap to provide resources to those companies that we identify as individuals and founders that are building great companies leveraging the blockchain technology. And if we could provide those resources to help accelerate them, help them grow, help them go to market beyond just LATAM, and that's what we want to do. So I would say in general, bridging the gap, providing and being a signal for LATAM, right? Something that I always say, Latin America doesn't have those key indicators that venture capital uses to identify great founders. General examples would be, the Stanfords, the Harvards of the world, the Goldman Sachs, the Carlyles of the world, right? So because of not having that, there needs to be another signal, and that's what we hope to become, right? That signal to Latin America. Once we identify great founders, put them in front of, the right teams, the right people, sort of help them get to the next level.
All right. And looking at the current trajectory, where do you think the market's heading? So what would you say that would be, some big trends, or what developments are you looking forward to in Latin America?
The main reasons I'm bullish about Latin America, it's, it's a young generation, it's a large user base. They're early adopters into technology. because of all the hardships sometimes that they come across, not all countries, but I would say some or most, they're not afraid to just engage with technology. And also the informal economy, I think it's a big opportunity to create solutions to bring that value on chain and sort of grow the ecosystem, grow the market.
Also, generally speaking, in terms of trends, it's as we see just different ways to be able to earn that are interesting. I think as Christian mentioned, like $5 means a lot to folks that live in Latin America. Just to give an example, not that this is my favorite, for example, play to earn type of games where you can earn anywhere between like $100 to $500 extra a month. That's actually a huge impact to a family that lives in Latin America. So as you have these different types of models that just come out, it's just going to be interesting to see it be adopted. Now, on the other hand, in terms of some of the main factors that I'm definitely seeing in Latin America, so there's just a lot of internet and smartphone penetration that's pretty deep there. Also, in terms of the population, you do have a lot of young folks. And as mentioned before, the example of inflation, there is a need for financial alternatives. And, blockchain can create some really interesting models. And there's also a growing interest in cryptocurrencies more generally.
Yeah, so I think those are the catalysts. We are also looking in the broader space, but definitely this is something specific to the region that, looks really well in positioning them to embrace blockchain because it brings so much benefits. What advice can you give builders wanting to make Web3 projects in Latin America?
The advice I would give builders is just to have an open mind, is to see problems and understand what type of benefits that blockchain technology can provide. In addition, there's just a lot of educational tools out there. And these educational tools can be found online. Also, I truly believe that networking is very important. Networking is key to being able to build out your network and continue learning.
Advice, I would say, think global. What I realized from the set of samples that I've come across is that builders in LATAM build for LATAM. And I think sometimes the global perspective is not there. Some of them, and obviously there's a lot of great companies that are building to be global, but I would say specifically in Web3, I would say the new generation of builders are coming up that are not sort of repeat founders, do tend to just stay local or solve local problems. And it's something that we say as part of our accelerator program as well. Think global. Your user base shouldn't be just the Web3 community or Web3 users. And that's something that we are seeing a lot of, where builders in Latin America build for the 90%, whereas something that I always like to say is that advanced economies or companies building in Web3, they build for the 1% or they build for the Web3 community. And I think that's an advantage that Latin America has, right? They're putting the tech under the hood and building for the masses. And that's something that I continue to just say, hey, build for the world, be global. And I think we continue to sort of share those concepts. I'm very hopeful for Latin America to definitely be a premier region with amazing founders.
Yeah, that's great advice. All right. So thank you, Max and Christian, for giving us an overview of Web3 activities in Latin America. And we'll be, of course, observing how does the region develop, especially in this direction. And yeah, I hope we can, have you back on another episode in the near future. So I encourage any of you listeners to subscribe, leave your reviews. And if you have questions, you can also just ask them under all the communications regarding this episode. And yeah, we'll be back next week with another episode of the Aleph Zero Podcast. So see you then. Bye-bye.